Hello, everybody. I'll give you a moment to connect to sound. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1263rd New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Flora Yukhnovich and Amanda Gluibizzi. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Born in Norwich, United Kingdom in 1990, Flora Yukhnovich's characteristic painting language emerged during a period of study as a student at City and Guilds of London Art School, where she completed her MA in 2017. Most recently, Yukhnovich has had solo exhibitions at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, the Wallace Collection in London, and Ordupgaard in Charlottenlund, Denmark in 2024. Her work is held in prominent collections worldwide. And our host today, former associate professor at Ohio State University, Amanda Gluibizzi, is the founding co-director of the New Foundation for Art History and ArtSeen editor for the Brooklyn Rail. She specializes in mid and late 20th century art, design, and urbanism in the US, Europe, and Latin America, and is the author of Art and Design in 1960s New York from Anthem Press in 2021. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Amanda to get us started.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Chloe. And thanks everybody for being here today. Before we get started, I just want to mark this moment. October 2025 represents the Rail's 25th anniversary, which is a huge, just think of how you felt when you turned 25. Media organization in this environment. The Rail is something that means so much to me. It still is free. It still publishes new people almost every issue. And it's the nicest people that you will ever meet. I have worked a lot of jobs in my life, and only at the Rail will someone spontaneously text you and just tell you, wow, I really loved what you did today. No other place does that, and I can attest very, very sincerely to this. So first, I want to just say thank you to everyone who has worked or is working at the Rail. Congratulations to Fong, to Chloe, to Charlie, to Lewis, to Georgia. I'm so happy for you and so proud of you. But I also want to say that we're having an issue launch party tonight at Paula Cooper Gallery at 21st Street in Chelsea. It's from 6 to 8, and this is the issue launch party where we're celebrating 25 years. So if you happen to be in New York and want to come to Chelsea, please come to Paula Cooper. I will be there in sparkle shorts, as we've already established. And I think it's going to be really fun because, again, these are the best people you could possibly know. So again, congratulations. Without further ado, Flora, thank you so much for being willing to speak to me today. I've been following your career since I saw a painting of yours at Sotheby's in 2021, I think. And when I saw it from across the room, I just thought, like, wow, who is this artist? So I've been following your work now for a few years, traveled to London to see your show at the Wallace and to write about it. And I was so grateful to be able to think about the Rococo there. And now I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you today about your work at the Frick, your 4 seasons. So thank you for being here, and congratulations to you as well.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, as I mentioned, before seeing this installation, I've seen your work mostly as standalone canvases, so we could call them easel paintings, if you like. But here you've painted an entire room and created an environment. And I should point out to our viewers right now that this is installed in what was the Frick's Boucher room. So this was where the boiseries that were painted by Boucher were originally installed prior to the Frick's recent renovation. So can you tell us a little bit about your approach to this commission and to the immersive quality of the Four Seasons?
Yeah, so the idea of immersion has been kind of in my work for a long time. I'm very interested in the distinction between things that we look at and things that we feel, and how can you kind of convert the two? How could you take something that's like an object and make it feel experiential? And so this felt like a really fun, on the nose way of like exploring that very literally. The project itself is part of an ongoing series the Frick are working on called their diptychs, where they invite an artist or writer, and I got to come to the collection and choose a work of art and think about how I would respond to it. And I wrote an essay, and then I also made this piece, and the essay is sort of about the concept of making the piece, but also sort of about the process. I learned a lot through making the work itself. And I guess when I was looking around and thinking about which work to choose, it felt very natural to me to go for Boucher, because I've looked at his work a lot in my own work. I've had this ongoing fascination with the Rococo period, and Boucher is sort of the king of that period, is someone I've looked at a lot and borrowed a lot from his work. And I did a project last year with the Wallace Collection, looking closely at his pastorals. But what I loved about the Four Seasons was the very unusual shape of them. They have these rounded corners, they're almost circular. And they were made as overdoors. So they would be set into the architecture above the doorway or above a cabinet. And the idea with these kind of paintings is that you would walk through under them and look up as you pass through. And it made me think of sort of thresholds or like portals into another dimension. And I really liked that idea. And I started thinking about portal fantasy and stories like Alice in Wonderland or like Narnia, where you go through the rabbit hole or through the wardrobe, sort of as a specific entry point. And that got me thinking about how to make a painting into a portal. And I thought if I did a wall covering, I'd be able to make a room that was a painting that you could literally step inside. And there's also a really interesting relationship between Boucher and, well, the Rococo generally, and architecture and design. There's sort of a flattening. There's no real distinction or hierarchy between those things. And I thought it would be really interesting to explore painting and this sort of decorative language of wallpaper, and do something that interacted with the architecture in the same way that Boucher did.
It's so interesting to me to hear you say that you were curious about this conversion almost from sight to feel, or from the eye to the rest of the body. It reminds me of the theories of vision that were prevalent in the early modern period. A lot of artists believed in extramission, which meant that they believed that tiny eye beams went out from their eyes, grabbed things, and then brought them back to their sight. And so their sight itself was a very haptic moment for them. And so here we are in 2025 thinking about this. And of course, now we're in a room where basically all of these things can be pressing upon us as though we were totally immersed in them. When you write for the Frick, you write actually that the wallpapers are curious things. They speak of wonder and escape, but also of containment. They reassert the very walls around us. It makes me wonder what escapism really offers. Is getting lost the spectacle, not a denial of reality, but a vital part of it? Can you speak a little bit about this idea of spectacle for you in this room?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think what I was talking about was escape and I was trying all the way through to make up my mind about like what the value of it is. And I came away sitting on the fence. But I think my research, obviously it's wallpaper. So one of the first things I looked at was the story, The Yellow Wallpaper. And the idea I don't know, that really spoke to me, that the sense of sitting, looking at a wallpaper and it following like the eddies and the movement of a pattern round and round until it's sort of driving you insane, and you can see the woman coming out, and you, I don't know, it really felt, even though it's a very extreme example, it felt very like relatable. And it also got me thinking about Dorothea Tanning's work and looking at her painting, particularly children's play, I think it's called, that has little girls pulling wallpaper off the wall, and behind it there's these sort of monstrous bodies pushing out. And I read that she said that her childhood was so boring that the only thing that happened was the wallpaper. And I think there is that sense of the spectacle of it being so overwhelming that it's cloying, that it's oppressive, and that it really offers, you know, it's a fake form of escapism. And it sort of made me think about how that might exist in a digital realm. I think about digital wallpapers with iPhones and computer screens, and I guess the sort of dystopian scene that you see every morning on the subway of watching people literally just like tapping at the glass, like endlessly scrolling, which I think is the similar kind of fake escapism, I suppose. And I guess that is like one way of looking at it. I personally really love fantasy. I'm like very obsessed with fantasy stories in quite a cringe way. And I don't know, I'm wary of the idea that it's unserious, or that it's, you know, it kind of speaks of the old idea that novels cause hysteria. And I think, you know, it's something to be, well, the novels are something to be wary of is an odd idea to me. And I think we work out so much about the world through these fictional spaces, or even in dream, where you're somewhere else and you process your stresses and your kind of problems in the world in this other kind of vehicle. And I think that fiction and escapism can provide that. But I guess it felt really important with this work to have both of those sides going on, and to have that that conflict play out. I am someone who, you know, I could live inside an audiobook for my whole life, and it's always a real wrench to pull myself away and actually get on with things. So I really wanted that like tussle in the work. I wanted it to have this deep like illusory space that kind of sucks you in, and then I'm sort of playing with like printed decorative motifs that really sit on the surface to try and think about like breaking the spell and bringing you back into the room. Yeah, it through the research, it made me, I kind of decided that I couldn't make up my mind about all of it, and I wanted that feeling to be in the work.
Oh, I love that. Hearing you speak about this, it reminds me of the fact that what we think about of as wallpaper, especially if we think about something with a scene, really does actually start in the Rococo period, doesn't it? Not necessarily printed wallpaper like we would use now, but rather hand-painted wallpaper. And especially if you think about the development of chinoiserie or japonisme in the Rococo period, these wallpapers served as a way to allow the people sitting in drawing rooms to project themselves into other spaces, and frankly, into countries that they had never seen and probably never would see. And so, of course, since they'd never seen them, they were totally imaginary. And so it's really wonderful then to think about your wallpaper doing something of the same. Xavier Solomon, the curator that you worked with, referred to this as another period room in New York. And so I love this idea of this existing in its own time rather than existing in hours or in the past in the Rococo.
That's such a nice idea. I love the idea of like compressing time and having sort of references to different moments that all exist in one space, and you experience it all at once, and it does have a kind of anachronism to it.
You mentioned something about, trying to determine what to put in and how to fit it all in. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about the different scales that you're working with in these walls. Some of the objects seem like we're seeing them from a distance, and some of them feel like we're actually pressing our faces right up into them. Maybe like we're leaning into a rose to smell it or something. And so it's coming closer and closer to our faces. Can you talk a little bit about the scale choices that you made?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually the scale choices were, I wanted it to have this relationship with fantasy and have a kind of surreal feeling to it. So the scale choice was partly that. Let's make these things that should be small, like enormous bits of foliage, enormous flowers, and then sort of mess with it and have little figures that I've taken from Boucher paintings and sort of pop them behind it and play a little bit with it. Because I was keen that it didn't just speak exactly like a wallpaper and that it didn't just do one thing. I wanted it to disrupt the space and disrupt the logic of the space, to keep that push and pull alive. And I think playing with the scale and perspective a little bit helps with that. And the way I work is I sort of start the painting, create sort of a stage in a way, and then put elements in, cover them up, take them out, and it's very collagey. And I do my best to make sure that the light's coming from the same direction and all of those things to try and make it as bound together as possible. But there's always accidents in it, and I think that glitching, which definitely happens in terms of scale, I think really helps to keep the eye moving between the distance and the surface, and to keep like slightly destabilizing what they're looking at.
Mm-hmm. When you were painting and thinking about that light source, were you thinking about the way that they would be installed at the frick? And is it consistent with the light source in the frick too?
It's not consistent with the light source in the frick, but I did, it's four walls, so there was no way that I could get, one single light source, but I wanted to make sure it didn't sort of conflict too much at any point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you've spoken in the past about how the content of Boucher has interested you. You've mentioned, the different figures and looking at the the personal interactions of the characters within Boucher's. I'm kind of curious when we look at these works in what you're looking at in the way that Boucher painted. The paintings that are at the Frick tend to be on the more finely painted side for Boucher. And so we might think that you would be more automatically drawn, for example, to a Watteau or a Fragonard. And so I'm very curious about this. What was it about Boucher and his painting that really interested you?
I think there's a sense of completeness in the way he paints, even in the bigger works, which are looser. And he's obviously an incredible painter. It looks so easy. But there's something about each mark feels enclosed. It doesn't have like a brushy end and a hard end like many brushstrokes would have. They feel like little gobbets of paint on the surface, and they feel very luxurious. And I think there is something quite like perverted about the mark making in itself, which I enjoy and find amusing at times. I think with these works, there was something about, they're beautiful scenes, and the paint itself is very beautiful. And it's not just that they're beautiful, they're like abundant. It feels like these people could never be hungry or never be cold or anything like that. And I think the paint speaks to that. It's so, luxurious. And it's like if you took the, the meaning out of the painting and just looked at the paint marks, they themselves look like a sort of pastoral or like a land of plenty. And I don't know, this one, I love this autumn with the grapes. Each grape is like this perfect blob with a creamy white blob that's the highlight. They're just, beautiful. But I think you could probably say the same for Fragonard's work. I think what Boucher has specifically that I find really interesting is I think he's quite they're quite meta. I think he's painting like he's not really painting figures and landscape and foliage. I think he's painting paintings of those things. And I think he's not interested in showing like the touch of grass or like, yeah, what the temperature would be. I think it's they are like little stage sets, and I think he's curating these like cultural motifs in a way. And I think that's true in terms of like the content of the paintings, but then also in terms of the way he paints. I think there's this he's sort of using these curved lines that are quite predictable. They're very contrived and very decorative, even in just like the painterly nature of the mark making. And it feels like every mark could almost have been lifted out of some kind of Rococo carving. And to me, there's something about this kind of granular dedication to the Rococo language that expands outside of painting into like gilt clocks and like candelabra and things like that, that I just find that about his work, the sort of meta nature of it and the absolute dedication to exploring the languages of artifice that are in the play in the Rococo is really interesting and feels quite contemporary and speaks to the way I work, which is also kind of collaging bits of, paintings of paintings together.
I feel like I just heard the single best case ever made for why we should be interested in Boucher. I think Boucher is such a hard artist for so many of us to love. And I think that you've just really convinced me that I need to be looking at him much, much more closely. So if you're looking at something like this is Four Seasons Winter. This is my personal favorite panel. So what you're saying is it's not just then that, for example, the curve of the bottom of the sled is replicating the bottom curve of the canvas. It's also that when you start looking at the painting itself, that it's so granular that you're actually seeing him like developing curves within his brushwork itself, so that everything is being built up almost like, I don't know, like the most extravagantly like feathered breast of a bird or something.
Yeah, exactly. And every shape takes on that, that like serpentine quality, sort of like serpentine and a flick. And you can see it in the sleigh, then moving into the swan. It kind of does that, and then it does that again. And yeah, it's happening in every brushstroke, I think.
Oh, I'm so interested. Chloe, can you show us slide 23, just because that has a detail of a Boucher so that people can kind of see what one of his paintings looks like. This is the first Boucher I ever knew. This is at the Cleveland Museum of Art, and it's actually quite large, an actual really big painting. So basically like a mural-sized painting. And so, of course, he is brushier than he might be in the overdoors, which, are of course, significantly smaller. But I think everybody can see on the right-hand side, this is the detail of one of those male figures, and the leaf that he's wearing has this really, really beautiful moment where each little part of it is curled up. And so each brushstroke then kind of ends with like a curling lip that then gives us a highlight of this feather or leaf. And so, I'm just showing this to everybody so that they can kind of see this idea of like what his brushwork might look like in a much brushier mode.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Those little golden bits across the top, that they really echo just that shape in the mark making. It's beautiful.
Yeah, this painting is very interesting too, because there are moments where you can just see like a brush mark of pure color. Especially white highlights. Not necessarily in this detail, but if I had details, for example, of some of the flowers, there are moments like in the water that are just brush marks of pure color. Such an interesting and very modern way of painting. Not necessarily something we would think about in the Rococo, where people are really like focusing on their modeling, for example.
Yeah, I think there's actually a lot of painting in the Rococo period that is really gestural, and there's just so much exciting surface texture going on. But I think almost there's so much in the image that's decorative that it sometimes overpowers conversations about how much like painterly interest there is happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for us to realize that, of course, the Rococo follows on the Baroque. First of all, Rococo is possibly derived from this term Barocco, which is where we get our French and then English Baroque. But people were learning from masters who were painting at the very ends of the Baroque period, which, again, if we think about the masters of the Baroque, Rembrandt, for example, Velázquez, it makes sense that there would be this gesture in Rococo painting. Yes, it is moving towards more decorative ends, perhaps, but the bones of the production are still there. So your Four Seasons responds to the Frick's Four Bouchers, same subjects. So I'm interested in the seasonality of your paintings. Can you tell us a little bit about how you thought about the seasons, and what are you doing with them? Are you attempting to illustrate the feel of the season? Are you working with the iconography of the season? Can you just tell us more about this?
Well, obviously it's 4 walls, so one season each wall. It's very sophisticated thinking. And I started with the long wall because I thought, you want summer to be on the long wall, so I placed that there, and then everything else kind of fitted in around that. And I was keen to have the spring panel between the 2 doors, because I think there's kind of a natural upwards motion. You think of spring, you think of like daffodils and shoots coming out of the ground. And then autumn is straight in front of you as you come in, which, is fluke, but kind of nice that the show opened at autumn and it's like right in front of you. When I was thinking about seasonality, I think I wanted summer to be long and lazy and sort of expansive. And I suppose with autumn, okay, the way I work is that I put things in and I take them out, and there's a lot of layering and it can get quite involved, and it's very trial and error. And these are really, really big panels. They don't actually look that big when they're on the wall in the space, but they are like 6-meter paintings, and it was a challenge just dealing with the scale. So I decided that I was going to work out how to paint them with autumn, to trial the different languages and the layering of the different languages, and see what was and what wasn't working, because autumn is, a time of overripeness and decay. So I thought a little bit of extra working there wouldn't be a problem, whereas I wanted spring to be really fresh, and I wanted summer to be like easygoing, kind of lazy. And I knew winter was going to be a challenge anyway, because you've got this like reduced palette that's possible. And, I wanted to keep it kind of Boucher-esque, keep it quite idealistic. And how do you do that with winter? So I suppose it became about like thinking about snow and about kind of that quiet atmosphere when it snows and suddenly everything just feels muffled. And I suppose I began by, I wanted each panel to move into the next one and not be too much like these kind of discrete paintings. And I guess I was pulling in different iconography from the different seasons, but all of that felt secondary to making sure it was a consistent, like single flowing vista, and to not break up the image at all. I don't look at Boucher's paintings and think, oh wow, this is the most realistic example of the seasons. I don't think you can really feel the temperature, especially in something like winter, where she has this bare chest, and I don't feel sorry for her in the slightest. And I think that if he'd wanted us to feel cold, he could have done that. I feel like it's really more about the seasons of that woman's life, or like moments in these, I don't know whether it's the same woman or not, but moments in a woman's life. That felt kind of more his way of looking at seasonality. Yeah, so just having this vista felt more important, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I very much liked the very, very thin panels that you painted that kind of fill in spaces in the room. It reminded me a lot, actually, of the big Fragonard room at the Frick. There's a particularly beautiful panel that you never see because it's just behind the door and the door is always open. And I always like to go and look behind the door just so that I can see it. And it's this gorgeous, gorgeous thing of falling leaves. And so I loved the way that you did this, that, you know, yes, you're solving a problem, you're filling space, you're making sure that it's fluid, but also it has this really, really wonderful gesture toward a solution that a painter made several hundred years ago as well.
I think there are some of those Fragonard panels that are still that are in storage, because I think not all of them fit in the Frick. Wrong, but I think that maybe they were showing at Frick Madison, but haven't been able to, that don't fit in the actual mansion.
Yeah, they're lovely. When we think about the Bouchers, they were commissioned by a woman, and a woman who was Boucher's most important patron, Madame de Pompadour, who was the official mistress of the King of France, of Louis XV or Louis XV. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Did that like play into your conceptualization of your own Four Seasons?
It definitely was something, while I was researching the work and thinking about how I would make my version of it, it did seem, it was certainly interesting. And I think there is, I think the fact that he chose to talk about the seasons through this story of women, and there are male characters there, but they're really peripheral. And it's the changing seasons. At the time that would have been so significant to people. Their lives would have been upended by the changing weather and what, how the harvest did and stuff like that. I wonder if the fact that it was commissioned by Madame de Pompadour is responsible for that focus. But I don't know. I guess that relationship seemed less relevant to these works than it has to some of my other work before. I'm definitely generally very interested in the relationship between Boucher and de Pompadour, and the way that they kind of worked together to build her image. I think of that amazing painting I think it's in Harvard, of Pompadour at her toilette, and she's like painting her face with the makeup, and Boucher's making a painting of her painting her face. And I think there's something so cool and kind of contemporary to think of him as this sort of like branding guru and helping her create this external image of herself. And I think it's really important to my idea of what the Rococo period is and why I'm interested in it. And Melissa Hyde, the art historian, writes so amazingly about this, about the relationship between Madame de Pompadour and Boucher, and how that is partially responsible for the idea of the Rococo being read as feminine, because he painted her face, and then she becomes incredibly unpopular after the fall of the Ancien Regime, and so does he. And there was a sense that she was a woman and he was her favorite artist, and as a woman she must have had really bad taste, and there's this whole like smear campaign that kind of drags them down together. And I think there's he's sort of tarred with that idea of being feminine bad taste, and that's really central to just kind of the general appeal of the Rococo to me. And is one of the reasons I started looking at it, really, is that I just noticed how much as an aesthetic it's employed to sell things to, or to talk about women and girls. There's a really loud siren outside.
First, I just want to say that, yes, you're totally right about the changing of the seasons. I remember in graduate school reading in some book that there was a dinner at Versailles and it was in the winter and the wine froze in people's glasses because it was so cold and Versailles is so big and there was no possible way of keeping it hot enough to even drink wine. So yes, you're absolutely right that that would have had an impact on people that it doesn't have on us today, and that it certainly doesn't have in Boucher's woman. When we think about the feminine quality of the Rococo, one of the things that we can think about too is the color choices of Rococo painters. If we think about the Baroque as being red, brown, deep blue, deep purple, forest green, for example, our idea of the Rococo would tend then to be pastels, light yellows, pinks, light blues. And so I'm very curious about this, first of all, about how it informs your palette in these paintings and in your broader practice, but also whether or not you see these as feminine or masculine or both in a way that we might disparage the Rococo.
I mean, I think there's something beautiful about relationships between secondary colors that maybe there isn't between, like, you know, bright red and a deep blue doesn't quite vibrate in the same way. So, and I think there's something about beauty that, you know, we think of as feminine and it's can feel a bit, I don't know, almost a bit political. I don't know. I read that pink was sort of started being used a lot in 18th century France because they discovered the pigment by colonizing South America, and so it becomes like a more used pigment. And then there's also something about Prussian blue becoming a popular pigment at the same time, and like the way that you could paint with Prussian blue is very different to other blues because it's very thin as a pigment. You can tint with it and you can kind of glaze, and so the treatment of skies becomes totally different, and they have this kind of watery depth to them, I think, because of that. And I suppose because those two colors are kind of like complementaries, to me, that is really what all Rococo palettes seem to circle around, is that kind of like fleshy pink color and then the turquoisey sky. And I really like working with pinks. I started painting as a portrait painter and I painted a lot of self-portraits, and obviously I have very pale skin, so pink kind of became it's kind of my go-to color. And I suppose it's a really interesting color because it has so much scope. Like, I think it is this sort of societally designated color of femininity that speaks about girlhood and womanhood and all of those things. But for me, it also speaks of skin and the inside of your mouth, or I think there's a way to use it that can feel really visceral and can talk about the experience of living in a body. And so for me, it holds those two things at once, kind of like an external designation of who I am as a person, and then also the internal experience of what it actually feels like. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. It is interesting to think about pink. We so easily dismiss it, which is funny because it's a universally flattering color. I can't think of a skin tone that doesn't look good in pink. And so even if we would choose not to wear it, it would still flatter us anyway. It is interesting too to think about the blues of Rococo paintings, because it's true that the blue isn't fugitive at all, which means then that the greens are also not fugitive. And so this idea of blue being a more available color is something that I hadn't even really thought of in the Rococo, but you're absolutely right about that.
And it really shades, I mean, Boucher's work especially is all blue. And there's that quote where he apparently said nature is too green and poorly lit, and sort of everything has this blue color to it, which I think adds to the feeling of like escapism or fantasy in the work, because it feels yeah, like it's in sort of the depths of something, or like it's far removed.
I can totally see what you mean by that too, looking at this painting. This is Four Seasons Autumn by Boucher, and thinking about the shadows in this work as well. They are more subdued, as we might think about like perhaps autumn light. But you're right also that they seem like they're totally away from things as well. They've been separated out from the outdoors and are in a controlled environment instead.
Yeah, yeah, like lit like they're on a stage.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Boucher too is known for his hints at and also sometimes his overt sexuality in his paintings. And so I'm curious about that for you too. When we looked at the autumn painting, for example, the trees are very sexualized trees. One of them has a fork, and there's another tree that has fallen in between the fork of the trees, right? So they are incongruous with one another. In the winter panel, she's riding on a sled, which is a swan sled. So we could be seeing, for example, a story of the Greek gods, right? Like Leda and the swan, where Zeus comes to Leda in the form of a swan, and she then bears his child. And so I'm curious about this for your work as well. Are you interested in the sexualizing elements of Boucher and the wider Rococo, or is this something that you feel is, like just I don't know, just kind of innate in painting, and especially in oil painting?
Such a good question. I think, yes, there is something about it that feels innate in oil painting. And there is something about it that feels like it's, exaggerated through the Rococo period. And I'm definitely interested in that. I think that oil painting is, has this, is oil paint has a kind of gooiness to it that I think is kind of erotic. And I'm totally interested in that. Absolutely. I think with these works, the Four Seasons, I think because there are more erotic examples of Boucher's work, it perhaps wasn't something that felt front of mind with these works. And I don't know, I read an amazing article by Eunice Lipton where she talks about the she talks about it as a different kind of eroticism or a different kind of sexuality that isn't marked by narrative thrust and therefore isn't kind of like penetration, but is more of this like skin on skin kind of self-sustaining is a sort of, well, a different kind of touch and eroticism, I suppose. And I think they do feel more like that to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even just thinking about the terms that we use to describe painting, right? Like wet on wet and things like that. I mean, there is a sense of the erotic in oil paint that, can be exploited or not, but remains there no matter what.
Yeah.
In your statement for the Frick, in the catalog that will be published soon, you write that there's a vulgarity to both the Rococo and paint that I find irresistible, like an overripe peach about to split open.
Yeah, I mean, it's always felt like that for me in the studio. There's I don't know, the first sort of hour of the day, I'm wearing gloves and I'm trying to say keep clean. And then you sort of like, you have to give yourself over to it. And it, by the end of the day, you're absolutely covered, you feel completely feral. And I don't know, there is some like weird, it's like you kind of lose control in it. And I think there is a vulgarity to that because I think good taste and properness is marked by restraint, and there's nothing restrained about Boucher or about paint and about painting in the studio. It's like you have to behave with abandon.
Mm. I think about that in terms of these paintings when I think about the occasional appearance of contour lines, which then almost immediately get kind of, I don't know, overturned and become other things. They become then modeling, or they become swaths of color or something like that. I was very curious. I was there at the Frick earlier in the week with Jason Rosenfeld, who is another art historian who writes for the Rail and does NSEs. And he was asking, oh, what do you think those grids are in the background of two of the paintings? And I was thinking, like, I have no idea, but I can ask. So can you tell us a little bit about line in these paintings?
I mean, I think a more illustrative line came in these works. I think because of the scale, and it allows an illustrated line to almost feel like a brushstroke and a gestural mark as opposed to a drawn edge. So it sort of allowed for it, and it felt important to have it. And I think there's something about the kind of, I don't know, the Rococo tendency to have this like decorative tendril that is almost like a free association. It then becomes like a peach, and then it can become like a bird or something like that. And that really speaks to the way that I work, because I'm sort of making a mark, and a week later I'll think, oh, that mark really looks like this, and then I'll turn it into that thing. And there is sort of like a free association as part of the process. The grid, I'm glad you asked about that. It came from, I have this book of fabrics and wallpapers, and I was looking at things that were sort of that language, kind of printed motifs, and trying to incorporate that wherever I could. If there was a printed version of a flower or a leaf, how can I put that in to sort of create a dialogue between these flat languages and these like graphic languages and the more painterly language of oil painting, to make oil painting and wallpaper as a dialogue, I guess. And I was looking at this fabric that had like a sort of toile de jouy pattern on it, and it also had so if you know how cotton sometimes has in the weave, it can get a sort of grid pattern where it's a tiny bit shiny, and it had that, and I thought could be fun just to add that and see how that plays with the space or cuts through the space. And when I put it on, I thought this is quite weird. It almost looks like something digital, like a, I don't know, it just looked like a force field or something weird. And I thought it really works as a way of making, kind of hinting at something completely flat and artificial looking that kind of breaks the spell of the illusion completely. And yeah, so I decided to keep it and then add it across into another painting as well.
Oh, that's so interesting. That would not have been my guess at all. So now I'm very glad that I asked you the question. I want to ask you one more question about these, and then I'll ask you a final question about your upcoming show in LA. So for me, standing in the room, one of the most striking visual elements are actually the tacking ribbons that run around the paintings, and they surround the paintings like frames, but they also act almost as compositional elements. And so I was really curious about those. They may just be totally practical. They may just be something that has use value and nothing more. But they are these really, really beautiful magenta grosgrain ribbons that act as the only purely horizontal and vertical elements in the work. And so I'm curious about them as compositional elements. And what I was thinking about with this is, Chloe, I'm looking at slide 24. a compositional strategy from the early modern period. Sorry about the darkness of this image. It just is a dark image, where a painter would place something horizontal, usually in the bottom third of a painting, and it kind of serves as compositional element to lock the rest of the composition together. And so I was really curious about those ribbons. Are they working compositionally for you? And if they aren't, then how did you envision them?
I think about this idea of horizontals and verticals, and sort of bringing a rationale or an anchor to the work all the time. I feel like it's so important to make anything feel really fluid. I think you need to have a place to be still so that then you can watch the movement happen in the painting. So it's certainly on my mind a lot of the time, and it's, you know, really key to the way I think about constructing a painting. The ribbon was, well, I mean, it started off as a purely technical problem-solving thing. You know, it's difficult to stretch wall to wall with no extra space to get leverage in. So we needed to find some way to kind of cover the edges. So that was really how it came about. And going to the Frick and seeing the fabric wall coverings they've got there, they have a similar kind of ribbon going around. And so it was really, yeah, a technical solution that ended up being a nice way to nod at the rest of the Frick. And then I wanted to use this sort of hot pink color to introduce something that feels a bit contemporary, a bit girlish, a bit, I don't know, a bit camp. And looking at it, it does do more than I'd expected. When the work went up on the wall and the trim wasn't in place, it felt like your eye sort of scanned across the surface from wall to wall. Whereas I think this works like a picture frame in that it actually channels your eye into the space. And because I was so keen to get that push and pull of, you know, illusion and flatness, it really has helped with that. And I think also there's something fun about the fact that it has a kind of iridescent sheen, and it operates totally differently in the light there, and it kind of glitches with where the light is in the painting. And I was really pleased with that effect, actually. I think it has a nice kind of playful quality to it.
Mm. Oh, that's such a nice answer. This image but Flora is absolutely right that when you're in the space, the ribbons actually are working with the paintings in a really fascinating way. So I'm going to ask you one more question. You also have an exhibition, a solo exhibition coming up later this month at Hauser and Wirth in Los Angeles called Bacchanalia. And so I just wanted to ask you to give us a preview of that exhibition, to tell us what you're thinking about for the gallery, and to let us know how it's responding to the conditions of the location, Los Angeles light, Hollywood, its relationship to the Rococo, anything.
Yeah. Well, it's called Bacchanalia. It's about excess. Kind of the pleasures and chaos of excess. And I feel like I've zoomed out and I'm looking at lots of different points of history, different moments of excess, from Bacchanalia to like Italian dancing manias in the Middle Ages, looking at Dutch still life as a kind of moment of excess that is to do with binging and kind of excess of surface, and then also looking at contemporary advertising and film. The show is it's a painting show, and I hope it's going to feel very excessive in the gallery. They're big paintings. I hope that it's going to feel like like an overwhelm of different references, and different historical periods being brought in, and an overwhelm of different surfaces. I've tried to really vary my kind of surface treatment across the paintings. And I hope it has like the frenetic energy of a Bacchanalia, but with a kind of the high gloss of contemporary advertising. Sort of wanted to straddle those two zones. Yeah.
And so we're looking at two of the works, I believe, that will be in the exhibition. And I'm noting, just looking at them right now, that they're both horizontal. Will everything be horizontal in the show, or are you going to have some verticality as well?
There are some vertical works, but they don't ever go over the top of the horizontal heights. I have these very long horizontal paintings. I was looking at the ratio sizing of cinema and of, like classic film screens, and that's sort of the dimensions that I've gone with for a lot of these paintings. Yeah, it's going to be kind of a long, thin, very lateral show.
You completely anticipated my question. That the reference to cinema is reading to me very, very clearly, even in a reproduction. So I'm excited to see this. So if our viewers are in Los Angeles or in Southern California, you can definitely go and see that, and we'll be very excited to know more about that. So Flora, thank you so much. Congratulations again. I'm going to turn it back over to Chloe for audience questions.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much, Flora and Amanda, for this conversation. It's been such a pleasure to listen to. I have so many audience questions, so I'm gonna try to get through as many of them as I can. The first one is, Flora, I would love to know more about your ekphrastic process. How do you think, react, and interpret the work you're responding to? What intellectual and emotional boundaries do you draw?
Oh my God, I don't understand the question. Sorry.
All right, I can go to the next one. Is there anything in there that you'd like to respond to before I move on?
No, can someone unpack the question for me?
Here, I'm going to put it in the chat as well. I'll read it again. I would love to know more about your ekphrastic process. How do you think, react, and interpret the work that you're responding to? What intellectual and emotional boundaries do you draw, if any?
So is that about sort of source material in the work? Okay, got it. Okay. I don't really draw any boundaries. I suppose it's always best when the things that I'm referencing and the sort of realm that I create through the multiple different reference points have personal resonance with me. So it's, something that I've come into contact with in a totally non-art way. And, whether it's a film I loved growing up or something like that, I think that if you feel emotionally involved, that comes out in the painting, just automatically without having to work hard at it. But no, I don't really put any boundaries in place. I think the more disparate, the more random the connections are that you can create, the more entertaining it is and more playful it is in the studio. I really hope that's answered the question.
It's a great answer. Thank you. And thank you for that question. The next question is, can you talk about your studio practice and methods of working? You mentioned that you utilize collage. Is that with the paint? And how do you go from research to painting? Do you draw or do you jump right in?
I don't draw. I need to start drawing more. I actually just stopped a while ago. I think I became more interested in the way that color can create this like immediate associative thing, and you sort of can lock into a painting and it might immediately stimulate a memory, whereas I think that drawing feels to me to be more associated with narrative. But I want to throw that out and start drawing more. The way I work is I'll have an idea and I will try and pin down the idea or the feeling that I have by collecting a lot of images and pinning them together. And the whole process of painting, it might be 9 months long. Making a show will be, I will just keep adding to that, sort of cushion of references and keep reducing it and trying to make it more robust and make sure that all the images really relate to one another. And it really helps me because I can look at that and feel the really distinctive emotion that I want to try and find in the work, as well as being this kind of resource for me to copy bits from and add them to the paintings. In terms of the actual work itself, I barely paint anything. I barely put brush to canvas without having something that I'm copying or that I'm trying to introduce to the painting from elsewhere. So the entire process of painting to me feels like a collaging of sorts. And while I go, I often photograph the work and then I digitally collage into the photograph of the painting, and that helps guide me forward with the work. And things come in and they go out, but it does just feel like a big mush of lots and lots of different references that, for me, sort of express this particular feeling that I wanted to get in the first place.
Thank you for that answer, Flora, and thank you for that question. This next question, we're all dying to know. What is your favorite season, Flora? And of these paintings, is there one that they ask which is your favorite? Is there one that speaks to you most, and which was the most enjoyable to paint and the most challenging?
Well, the most challenging was autumn because that was kind of my learning ground. The most enjoyable to paint was spring because I think there's a certain energy to it that just felt kind of playful and fun. I don't know, my favorite season normally is summer, but in America, it's definitely fall because it's, yeah, much more manageable.
Thank you for that answer, and thanks for that question. You talked about this a little bit, but Michael in the audience asks if he's observing accurately. I see Rococo colors similar to those of Raphael. Is that accurate to see in the paintings?
Yeah, I think so. I can see some Raphael in that for sure. It's not like I don't, he's not an artist that I've had around the studio a lot, but I mean, obviously I've looked at Raphael's work and I can see, I totally understand that.
Thanks, Michael, for that question. This is the last question. You mentioned the push and pull for the viewer when looking at your work. Is there also a push and pull for you when you paint between seriousness or purpose and giving into making things beautiful?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is kind of the motor that drives my practice forward 100%. It's a push and pull between yeah, making things beautiful, making things playful, and then being cringed out by that and wanting to pull back. And I don't know, I'm very interested in like hierarchies of aesthetics, and I feel like I sort of pinball between wanting to make serious paintings and then wanting to make the stupidest painting possible. And that, yeah, the whole process is marked by I guess doubt and wishing it was different in the moment, I guess, which keeps me moving from one end of the spectrum or any spectrum to the other.
Well, thank you so much for answering our questions and for this conversation. I know we're going to conclude today with a reading. Amanda, I will pass you the mic.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, so much for sitting in on this. And again, Flora, thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. So Flora and I talked about a few different things that we should read at the end, and we both agreed that this poem seems to be perfect. It's called Medlars and Sorb Apples by D.H. Lawrence. It was published in 1925, so 100 years this year. And it is a lurid autumnal poem. I love you rotten, delicious rottenness. I love to suck you out from your skins, so brown and soft and coming suave, so morbid, as the Italians say. What a rare, powerful, reminiscent flavor comes out of your falling through the stages of decay, stream within stream. Something of the same flavor as Syracusan muscat wine or vulgar marsala, though even the word marsala will smack of preciosity soon in the pussyfoot West. What is it? What is it in the grape turning raisin, in the medlar, in the sorb apple? wineskins of brown morbidity, autumnal excrementa. What is it that reminds us of white gods? Gods nude as blanched nut kernels, strangely, half sinisterly flesh fragrant, as if with sweat and drenched with mystery. Sorb apples, medlars with dead crowns. I say, wonderful are the hellish experiences, Orphic, delicate, Dionysius of the underworld. A kiss and a vivid spasm of farewell, a moment's orgasm of rupture, then along the damp road alone, till the next turning. And there, a new partner, a new parting, a new unfusing into twain, a new gasp of further isolation, a new intoxication of loneliness among decaying, frost-cold leaves. Going down the strange lanes of hell, more and more intensely alone, the fibers of the heart parting one after the other, and yet the soul continuing, naked-footed, ever more vividly embodied like a flame blown whiter and whiter in a deeper and deeper darkness, ever more exquisite, distilled in separation. So in the strange retorts of medlars and sorb apples, the distilled essence of hell, the exquisite odor of leave taking, Yam qua vale, Orpheus and the winding, leaf-clogged, silent lanes of hell. Each soul departing with its own isolation, strangest of all strange companions, and best. Medlars, sorb apples, more than sweet flux of autumn, sucked out of your empty bladders and sipped down perhaps with a sip of Marsala, so that the rambling sky-dropped grape can add its music to yours, Orphic farewell and farewell and farewell. And the ego sum of Dionysius, the sono io of perfect drunkenness, intoxication of final loneliness. Signed, San Gervasio.
Thank you for closing us out with that reading, Amanda. And thank you again, Flora and Amanda, for this really wonderful conversation. I would also like to thank Christine and Stefan at Hauser and Wirth and Mitch Case from the Frick for their huge support in preparing for today's program. I'd like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art and Tiger Foundation, who sponsor the New Social Environment program and make conversations like this one possible. They also support our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. And as Amanda said at the start, the Rail has been free and independent for, drum roll, 25 years. A donation directly supports our writers, our staff, and our operations. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free tonight, do please join us in celebrating the Rail's 25th anniversary this evening from 6 to 8 p.m. at Paula Cooper Gallery on 21st Street. We'll be hosting the launch of our October 2025 issue, and it should be a really good time. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Stanley Walakau Wanambwa and Lucas Blaylock on the occasion of the release of Index 2025 from Roma Publications. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Flora.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Amanda.
Thank you, Flora.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Flora.
Wonderful conversation. Thank
Flora
you.
and Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. As
Thank you so
usual.
much.
Bye, everybody.
Congratulations
Bye.
on
Thank
the
you.
great
Go see the
show.
show. Go see the show.
Woo!
Thank you.
I've seen it once already and coming back. Thank you, you guys. Congratulations.